Hey, Age Lead Store fans, this is Bill Rice again, and this week in our sales training, we are covering how to warm up cold leads. And this is not just for you who are buying aged internet leads, but this is for anybody that has a database or a CRM full of cold leads, or maybe you're just handed a book of business to start your sales career with. You are going to want to stay tuned. We are going to show you a proven framework to actually move through and warm those leads up, and also some marketing tips and tricks to help those first initial outreaches be a little bit warmer. Stay tuned. Okay, before we jump into the actual framework, I want to talk a little bit about what we're talking about when we're talking about cold leads, to really kind of open up your mindset as to how these techniques can be applied and to what portions of your sales process they should be applied. So when I say cold leads, these can of course be talking about aged internet leads, which a lot of you are familiar with if you're clients of Aged Lead Store. These are internet leads that the customer actually went in and made an inquiry for perhaps an insurance rate quote or a mortgage rate quote, and then there has been some period of time before you actually get the lead. And so there's that notion of just an internet lead that has some age to it, some time between the initial customer inquiry and when you actually start working on the lead. The other category, which will probably incorporate a lot more of you, is just simply cold leads. These are leads that are in your CRM database that for one reason or another have fallen out of your workflow. They perhaps just got lost. Sometimes we make our workflows so complex that we just actually lose little bits and pieces and categories of our lead flow and just simply accidentally neglect them. There are also ones in there that were just non-responsive for whatever reason. The customer wasn't responding to us, and so over time they get cold and they begin to age. The other big category is if you're a new sales rep, a lot of times you're actually given a book of business, or your sales director says, hey, dig into the company database and dig out some gold out of these old leads that nobody else has been successful with. And all of the things that we're getting ready to talk about, this 9-point framework is going to help you in all of those different scenarios. And then at the end, I'm going to talk in more detail about our first step in the framework, and that is to give you some marketing techniques to actually begin to work on this list long before you start to actually do your cold outreach and try to connect with them, to make that first contact just a little bit warmer. Okay, let's start. Step one. Step one is we want to actually do some marketing. We want to do some things with this list that will help us to just get on that customer's radar, so that when you make that initial contact, whether you're reaching out via phone or maybe by email for that initial cold call, that hopefully they've seen you somewhere else before. And at the end of this video, I'm actually going to give you some very specific marketing techniques to use, but I don't want to get too deep into that as we go through the framework. But the first and foremost thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to try to do a little bit of marketing to warm that lead up before you have to make that initial contact. Number two, and this may seem obvious, but this is probably the most missed step in the framework, and that is simply that you have to work them. It is going to take everything in you to kind of get over the anxiety of reaching out to a cold lead, but you're going to need to work them with all of the energy, with all the enthusiasm that you do with fresh, brand new leads. And in a lot of cases, you can actually reach out to them in a similar way, but you do have to simply work them. You have to call them, and you're going to have to email them in order to make any sort of headway on this list. All right, number three, and this is really important. A lot of times when we're thinking about cold leads, we're thinking about hundreds of leads and sort of scaling things with systems. But I encourage you to slow down just a tiny bit and look in your CRM for past notes and conversations. So that's number three. Look at your CRM and lead by lead, kind of look at past conversations and notes that are in there, and use that as personalization, not only for the call itself, but also for any sort of emailing that you're going to do. A lot of times there's some real gems in there. You'll get some understanding of kind of what they were talking about, or potentially what their needs were at the time. And it sets up a lot of really interesting personalizations, even if you're doing automation. to be able to pull out very specific pieces to that past conversation. For instance, if you're buying aged internet leads, a lot of time inside of that file or some very particular details about the type of product they had in the past, or potentially if you're talking about mortgage, what was the interest rate that they had, maybe the loan amount. So there's all kinds of details that will help you to personalize both a phone call as well as an email. Number 4, and I got this suggestion off of a Hubspot article that I'll link to here, but it's super important and something that I think all of us have probably experienced before. When you are making that call or you're making that email, be careful not to corner your prospect. So often we get aggressive and we sort of think of cold leads as kind of not the same level, right? It's kind of junk left over, it's kind of discarded waste. And you got to remember, those are actually consumers and potentially really good customers. Just for a variety of reasons, they've become cold. So don't kind of jump on them. Don't get aggressive with your sales pitch. Don't put them in a corner. Don't sort of force the issue and go for the jugular on that close too early just because they've got this label of cold lead. So really try to treat them with respect and even use the same sort of kind of passion and vigor that you would with a real-time lead. And I think that will really improve your approach. Again, no one wants to be cornered. No one wants to feel as a customer when you contact them that somehow there's this aggressive, hard sell coming at them. So be careful. Don't corner your prospects. Number 5, be as personal as you can. Kind of hand out feelers. When you're doing those calls and you're doing those emails, send them out as just little feelers. And we're going to talk a little bit about getting kind of some soft closes in there. But when I talk about feelers, I'm talking about sending them or talking to them about maybe something in the news, a piece of content that you think they might be interested in, or one of the real gems that I think is great for this type of warm-up is invite them to a webinar. You can do this online. It gives them a lot of flexibility. A lot of times we will invite people to maybe a seminar, but then they get this sense of kind of being locked in a room. They have to change their schedule and be somewhere at a particular time. But a webinar is beautiful. A lot of people are really familiar with them now. This has always been popular in the B2B space, but even in the B2C space, people know what a webinar is. They can attend it at their leisure. They can go and watch it in their browser, on their laptop, or even on their phone. And if they don't want to rearrange their schedule, typically there is that video or the slide presentation that's going to be delivered to them later. So it definitely builds in at least a couple of different opportunities to connect with them in a good way. And we'll talk, like I said, about using those kind of techniques to get a soft close, but just a really, really easy way to sort of put out a feeler that feels like value first and just give them a little bit of an invitation to start talking to you again. All right, number 6, try to get a soft close. I'm a huge advocate when you're working aged or cold leads of trying to get them to re-opt in. And again, a lot of people feel like this is just kind of wasting time, if you will. They've already bought the lead. You've got the email, you've got the phone number. So a lot of people will argue, well, why would I get them to opt in again? Why would I get them to submit another form? Why would I get them to call me back? Why would I get them to resubscribe to my list? And of course, all of the reasons that support that is it really gets them re-engaged with you. So when I'm talking about getting a soft close, I'm talking about building into your system of outreach some little wins that show that they're re-engaging with you, re-initiating contact. So if you're sending emails, that could be as simple as an open. It could be a click-through to your website. It could actually be subscribing or downloading something that you have available on that landing page. Maybe it's an ebook. Maybe they're actually subscribing to your newsletter again. Maybe they're actually signing up to attend that webinar. But actually work for those little soft closes, not the main sale when you're trying to warm those leads up. And start to recategorize. If you're building a system or a workflow, move those people into a different workflow. Move them into another segment that you can start talking and working to at a more engaged level, and start start to change your tone and your approach because they have made an initial engagement. They said yes to you for the first time, and start to sort of think of them now as warm, new leads, and potentially address them like you would a client. Number 7, and I think this is an opportunity that is often missed. Go ahead and share some indicative pricing. So often leads go cold because of fear. That consumer, or even in the B2B space, whoever that potential client is, may have an inflated expectation of what it is to buy your service, what it is to get insurance, what it is to actually refinance or do their mortgage. And it could be not only price, but it also could be process. Am I going to have to go through a whole bunch of pain to do this? Do I need to find documents? Do I need to organize things? Do I need to make time for this? So that fear can really make a lot of different leads go cold for no other reason than just missed or misunderstood expectations. So if you can, go ahead and put some indicative pricing out there. Now, again, this may depend on your industry as to what you can share, but it could be some rates, just general rates. It could be specific pricing. It could be actually what it costs to do business. It could be just merely telling them how simple it is to go through your process. But anything that you can do to push out to them some sort of indicative pricing or indication of how simple the process is to help them get over the fear is a great way to warm these leads up. Number 8, and this is a little bit related to a lot of these things that we've talked about. But number 8 is to talk about what has changed. Again, we know that this lead is cold, so there's been some amount of time, maybe 30, 90, maybe even longer, since the actual customer reached out to you, opted in for the first time, or had the first conversation with your organization. And there's been some time that has evolved. There are a couple of different things that you can use to your advantage as conversation starters. One is just simply asking them what's changed in their life, and if there is potentially now a need. Potentially they engaged with you the first time and they no longer needed. Something changed and they no longer needed to refinance their mortgage. They no longer needed that term life insurance. You can inquire about that. It could be just simply the fact that this time has evolved and now they actually do need that service again, or they do need to talk to someone again. So find out ways in your cold outreach to start to ask about changes in their particular situation that may cause them to need your service or product again. You can also talk about changes that your business has gone through, or you personally. Are you in a different place? Maybe before you didn't offer the product that they needed, and that's why they became cold. Now, do you have the appropriate license? Maybe you have the new product that now fits their need that you didn't have before. Maybe the organization has grown in some way. Look for things within your organization or within your qualifications or within your product set that have changed. That's another great topic that you can go through, is just kind of looking for opportunities to talk about what might have changed that now makes you a better fit for them, or potentially has changed in their situation whereby they need to engage somebody like you, and it helps remind them that you can solve that problem. Number 9, this is the last one, but probably the most important. Look for opportunities to demonstrate some urgency. And again, this could be around changes. It could be around new products coming out. It could be just changes in the marketplace that have created some urgency. Rates are a perfect thing, right? The Fed just did something, and that's going to ripple down and affect mortgage rates and insurance rates. So look for some reason to actually create some urgency. And the urgency should be created by the situation, by the product offering, potentially things that you make them aware of in their life, or maybe something that's changed in a legal or regulatory thing that's new, maybe a tax advantage to putting in solar, maybe tax advantage going away in solar. But look for those little opportunities to articulate a sense of urgency when you're making that outreach. But careful, don't corner your prospect. Just make them aware that there is some sense of urgency around whatever you're offering, and look for opportunities to articulate that. Okay, Now, having gone through kind of that 9-point framework of how you can make a warmer conversation, how you can warm up those cold leads, I want to jump back to number one. And number one is to initiate some marketing to get on the radar of that customer and all of those people in your cold list. And there are a couple of simple techniques that you can do to, one, stay top of mind to all your customers and all of the potential people in your market. But specifically, you can do some special targeting if you have a cold list. And again, we're going to make some assumptions that in that cold list that you're targeting, you have some emails, you have some phone numbers. And the first thing that I want to look at and focus on is those emails. So a lot of the social platforms that are also advertising platforms have the ability to do what's called creating custom audiences. And all this is taking your list, uploading it into Facebook and LinkedIn specifically, probably the most appropriate to do this technique with. You load them up, and then behind the scenes, they look at their profiles, they look at your email list, and they match up wherever they can. And then they pull out a custom audience. They pull out those very specific people that are on your list, and they create a group that you can then market to. And when you do that, again, you're talking very specifically to the people that you're going to subsequently be touching in other places with email, with phone calls. But since you can actually advertise to them on Facebook and on LinkedIn, you can start to bring up your brand awareness. And that's really what you should focus on. You should do advertisements in kind of two different genres. One is just simple branding so that they actually see the name of your company. If you're a mortgage broker or you're an insurance agent, you probably want to see your face and just have that flowing through direct at that custom audience. And even if they're really not paying attention to your advertising, it's going to start registering those impressions that's going to make that first phone call and that first email feel a little bit warmer, because they're going to go, oh, I seem to remember that Bill Rice guy from somewhere. We'll know where it's from. They may or may not kind of put two and two together. So it's a really good technique there to warm that up. The second piece of that, I like to do video, obviously. And video is a really great way to warm up a cold lead, because on video, even as short as it is, because you're using an advertisement or you're boosting into that custom audience and doing a real short video, you're going to get to see my face, you're going to get to hear my voice. And so when that first phone call comes in, or maybe an email, it's going to register to you a little bit more powerfully. Plus, when I'm using video, I actually get to give you a little sample of whatever that sales pitch is. And so even the sales pitch itself, you'll be a little warmed up to, and probably starting to think about whether or not that's benefiting you. So there's some power to that as well. So leverage those custom audiences. That's an easy way to start warming up that cold list without a lot of effort. Number two, reacquisition. I talked about this a little bit in my framework, but I am a big believer in getting these people to re-opt in, to re-engage, to reacquire into your real-time active sales pipeline. And a great place to do this, again, is on Facebook and LinkedIn using groups. Again, you can get them to register for your groups for whatever is actually you're sharing in there, right? You're going to be sharing tips about insurance, sharing tips about mortgage, maybe sharing some tips about solar. Get them engaged, get them reacquired into your active network, your active sales pipeline, your active marketing group by trying to get them to actually opt into your group or join your group. Facebook and LinkedIn is a great way. We had talked about resubscribing to newsletters and those sorts of things. So looking for opportunities to get them to re-opt in to some particular organization, group, or audience that you're marketing to. You can still use custom audiences here, but getting them to really kind of take that step to re-engage with you and to intentionally opt into another piece of your marketing system. Direct mail. Now, this is a little bit old school, but it's super effective these days, especially if you've got a cold list. Again, a lot of times, in addition to emails and phone numbers, it'll have addresses. Now you have a very defined, relatively small for direct mail list, and building out a piece of nice direct mail, landing into an inbox or a mailbox, that doesn't really have a lot of mail in it anymore, can be super effective. And again, even if they throw it away, they're going to look at it and you're going to build an impression. So it's going to make it warmer when you make that phone call, when you make that initial email. Potentially, you're going to get, probably 1 or 2 active sales conversations out of that anyway, and it's not terribly expensive. The other thing nice about that, when you're talking about a cold list, you're probably talking about a few hundred people. So even if you just take 20 of those people and write out a handwritten note and pay actual full postage, not commercial rate, but pay full postage to put that in a personal way, written in personal handwriting, can be really effective. So you send out 20, again, you're probably going to have at least 1 real sales conversation. So there's a lot of really clever things that you can do with direct mail that are probably as effective or more effective than they've ever been. The last thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to caveat like crazy, but it is talking about some innovative technologies, but the caveat I'm going to put on it is you need to talk to your TCPA attorney. You need to talk to your legal counsel first, because depending on where your leads come from and the different permissions that you've gotten from your consumer, you may or may not be able to use these technologies. But I think it's interesting to introduce them to you so that you can be thinking about the potential of using them if, again, it's compliant and it fits. So make all of those checks. But there's 2 interesting technologies that I think have a lot of credibility when you're interacting with customers just in general. Forget about the cold leads for a second. Again, they may or may not be able to be used for cold leads, but they are very interesting sales technologies. One is text messaging, and it's kind of more than a sales technology. It's just the way we live our lives now, right? So if you can actually use that as a process of how you interact with your clients, both new and old and prospects, I think it's really important, particularly even if you've got an actual client, you should be using text message with them because of 2 main reasons. One, it can be super efficient. There's all kinds of tools that make it sort of as efficient as email. You don't always have to actually type it out and do it on your phone, right? This is a little bit hard, but there's some desktop systems that allow you to do it just as efficiently as email. So there's an efficiency there. The second thing, and probably the most important, it is actually, a lot of people push back and say, oh, that's intrusive to have a salesperson actually talking to me through text message or have a company talking to me through text message. But actually, I would argue, and most of the clients and even some of the sales prospects that I've talked to have said, no, it's actually less intrusive, right? If you call me and I'm in an important meeting or I'm with my boss or I'm in a place that I can't take a phone call, that feels intrusive. But if you send me a quick text message, I can take a look. I can either ignore it, discard it. It actually comes on my lock screen, so I'm going to get to take a look at that. So it's really kind of not intrusive, especially if you don't overuse it and just kind of keep banging on them. But it's a really effective and considered way of just reaching out and seeing if they're available for a phone call or seeing if they're available to book an appointment to have a consult on a particular issue. So text messaging is a great way, and it's just becoming the default preferred way that most people are communicating these days. So there's no reason not to use it. I think early on, fax machines, people were like, oh, salespeople shouldn't use fax machines. And then everybody was using fax machines. And even when the telephone, people were like, oh, they shouldn't use the telephone and shouldn't call the home phone. And it just became, I think text messaging is sort of the same sort of thing. The other one that's really effective, again, you need to make sure that this is appropriate and relevant and you can actually use it, but that is ringless voicemail. And again, kind of 2 primary reasons that makes this technology super interesting. If you're doing phone calls, you will find out very quickly that most of your phone calls will actually result in leaving a voicemail. Most people don't even bother. I'm a big fan of always leaving a voicemail. I think it's important for them. Again, you're building the impressions, they're hearing your voice, they're starting to get used to that. Potentially a lot of your cell phones, which is where most of these voicemails are landing, actually get translated into text. So it's really easy for them to read your message. So voicemail can be super effective. The problem is it's really time consuming to leave a whole bunch of voicemails. And so ringless voicemail or even automated voicemail, which is probably a little less risky, that is usually provided by the CRM itself. You pre-record your voicemail. You can make it nice and tight and clean and short, which which sometimes when you're actually leaving a voicemail, you get long-winded, right? And that becomes a problem. But you can pre-record that voicemail, and in a lot of CRMs, you click the dial, you get the tone, you hit the button, it just drops the voicemail there. You don't have to actually say it. And so while it's dropping that audio file onto the voicemail system, you're off to the next call. So that's super efficient. I kind of like that one the best. But then there's also the concept of ringless voicemail. And in that particular case, you're not actually truly ringing through the phone. You're just literally dropping the audio files onto the phone number. And so it doesn't ring, so it's not really intrusive to the person, doesn't interrupt them, doesn't upset them, doesn't give them a weird number that they're not familiar with. It just pops on a voicemail into their voicemail box. And so the theory being, I would assume, is that people will just kind of assume they missed the call, and then they'll see the voicemail and they'll either like it or not, and they'll discard it or read it. And so again, a very efficient technology. In both of those cases, make sure that it is appropriate for the type of leads that you're working on. Okay, so today we talked a little bit about what cold leads are, what makes them that way, 9-point framework to actually take those cold leads and turn them into warm leads. And then last but not least, a really quick kind of 3 or 4 examples of ways to actually market to those cold leads to warm them up a little bit. I'm also going to link into here some great resources. There's a CRM that I love, Nutshell, and they've actually done kind of a whole process. There's a webinar that was done by one of their key head of growth there at Nutshell. So I'd love for you to watch that webinar. He tells all kinds of tricks about warming up cold list as well, so you get another perspective on that. Then there's also a checklist where you can download their system. So I'd love for you to check out those links as well. In all cases, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and get on our email list so that you get every single week's worth of these sales training. And on YouTube in particular, hit that bell so that you get alerted every time we drop a new sales training video. And we'll see you all next time.